I took the mic at Maple Falls Summerfest and said one sentence that stopped the music. My name was forged. Insurance in my name. A $48,000 loan with my fake signature. And a red food truck parked for a launch I never agreed to. Harold's cones blocked the prime spot. The news camera found my face. My son stood there in an apron, and every neighbor held their breath. So here's what happened, and what I did. I froze the loan, I flagged the insurance, the permit, on hold. Then I changed the plan. Today, we feed every nurse and firefighter for free. Monday, courthouse. My name gets its rules back. If you've ever had someone borrow your name because they feared your no, hear me. Love without consent is control. Love with consent is partnership. This isn't a story about barbecue. It's a story about boundaries. Rewind 72 hours, a weekday morning, garden gloves on, phone buzzing in my apron pocket. Miss Carter? Heartland Mutual. We're adding Smoke and Ember Barbecue, LLC to your homeowner's policy for the Maple Falls Summerfest permit. We just need your authorization. I pinched the phone tighter. I'm sorry, what did you say? She repeated it, slower, as if maybe I hadn't heard. I heard every syllable. Additional insured. My homeowner's policy. Some company with a name that sounded like a tattoo. I don't own a barbecue company. She replied, we have you listed as co-owner, or, guarantor. It shows Carter Lila R. as a signatory. We can email a copy. Please do, I said, because sometimes the fastest way to understand a storm is to step right into the rain. Within minutes, my email pinged. I wasn't ready, and yet I clicked. The PDF opened with my name in 12-point Times New Roman. Co-owner. Additional insured. Event, Maple Falls Summerfest. Date, this Saturday. The form included my address and the last 4 digits of my social security number. I stared at a digital signature looping across a line like an elegant ribbon. It wasn't mine. I don't put a heart over my I. I never have. That's when I realized the signature wasn't mine, and Saturday was coming fast. On a Tuesday in May, I was out there, gloved up and pinching off the little suckers on the vines, when my phone vibrated in the pocket of my gardening apron. The number was unfamiliar. I almost let it go to voicemail. I didn't. And that decision split my life into before and after. Miss Carter? A pleasant voice asked. Yes, I said, straightening up, palm against the small of my back. This is Amelia from Heartland Mutual Insurance. We're finalizing paperwork to add Smoke and Ember Barbecue, LLC as additional insured on your homeowner's policy for the Maple Falls Summerfest permit. We just need your authorization. I pinched the phone tighter. I'm sorry, what did you say? She repeated it slower, as if maybe I hadn't heard. I heard every syllable. Additional insured. My homeowner's policy. Some company with a name that sounded like a tattoo. I don't own a barbecue company. She replied, we have you listed as co-owner, or, guarantor. It shows Carter Lila R. as a signatory. We can email a copy. Please do, I said, because sometimes the fastest way to understand a storm is to step right into the rain. Within minutes, my email pinged. I wasn't ready, and yet I clicked. The PDF opened with my name in 12-point Times New Roman. Co-owner. Additional insured. Event, Maple Falls Summerfest. Date, this Saturday. The form included my address and the last 4 digits of my social security number. I stared at a digital signature looping across a line like an elegant ribbon. It wasn't mine. I don't put a heart over my I. I never have. That's when I realized the signature wasn't mine, and Saturday was coming fast. On a Tuesday in May, I was out there, gloved up and pinching off the little suckers on the vines, when my phone vibrated in the pocket of my gardening apron. The number was unfamiliar. I almost let it go to voicemail. I didn't. And that decision split my life into before and after.
"Miss Carter?" a pleasant voice asked. "Yes," I said, straightening up, palm against the small of my back. "This is Amelia from Heartland Mutual Insurance. We're finalizing paperwork to add Smoke and Ember Barbecue, LLC, as additional insured on your homeowner's policy for the Maple Falls Summerfest permit. We just need your authorization." I pinched the phone tighter. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" She repeated it, slower, as if maybe I hadn't heard. I heard every syllable. Additional insured. My homeowner's policy. Some company with a name that sounded like a tattoo. "I don't own a barbecue company." She replied, "We have you listed as co-owner or guarantor. It shows Carter Lila R. as a signatory. We can email a copy." "Please do, because sometimes the fastest way to understand a storm is to step right into the rain." Within minutes, my email pinged. I wasn't ready, and yet I clicked. The PDF opened with my name in 12-point Times New Roman. Co-owner, additional insured. Event, Maple Falls Summerfest. Date, this Saturday. The form included my address and the last 4 digits of my Social Security number. I stared at a digital signature looping across a line like an elegant ribbon. It wasn't mine. I don't put a heart over my eye. I never have. "Amelia," I said into the phone, steadying my voice the way I'd steady a patient during a blood draw. "That signature, not mine. I don't authorize this. Please put a hold on anything attached to my policy and flag this for your compliance department." "Of course, Miss Carter," she said, her voice sharpening the way professionals sound when a switch flips from routine to serious. "Do you want me to note suspected fraud?" "Yes," I said, and the word tasted metallic. I ended the call and tried to breathe. The hose I'd left dribbling sent a dark trail across the grass to my sneaker. I turned the spigot off with a twist that felt like wrenching a steering wheel to avoid a ditch. And then I went inside, my garden gloves dropping on the doormat like something I couldn't carry into the next moment. The FedEx truck pulled up as if the universe had cued it. The driver left a padded envelope on my porch. I signed for it like a person sleepwalking, and I sat at the kitchen table where I've opened pay stubs and Christmas cards and the letter that said I'd done the last overnight of my life. Great Lakes Credit Union. On top, a glossy brochure with a shiny red food truck and a slogan about smoke and spice and American dreams. Inside, a loan packet with my name on the first page and my forged signature on the 7th. Amount, $48,000. Purpose, food truck purchase and customization. Notary, a stamp that belonged to a woman who retired last summer. I knew because I brought her cupcakes on her last day when we closed my little CD that kept the rainy day fund for a rainy day that never seemed to arrive. I pressed my thumb into the page until it went white around the nail. Then I took my purse from the chair and grabbed my keys. The credit union was open until 4. It was 12:15. I drove with both hands clenched on the wheel, stopping properly at the new 4-way because Maple Falls installed cameras after Larry from the feed store blew through on a tractor and scared the mayor's dog. The Great Lakes lobby was cool and smelled faintly like new carpet. A teller I recognized waved. "Hey, Miss Carter," she said, cheerful and oblivious. "Need to make a deposit?" "I need to speak to a manager," I said, "about a loan in my name that isn't mine." They took me to Sonia, a woman in her 50s with dark hair and a neat bun and a small ceramic frog on her desk that said, "Do small things with great love." She offered me water. I said yes because I knew better than to decline hydration when my pulse ran high. I slid the FedEx packet across the desk with hands that wanted to shake. She scanned each page, her face tightening by degrees. "We were excited for your family business," she said softly at one point, then stopped, corrected herself. "I see here the notary stamp. I know this name. She retired last July." "I brought cupcakes," I said, because details matter when you're trying to tell the truth. Sonia called in a compliance officer, a quiet man with reading glasses that balanced on the end of his nose. They looked at the timestamp and the digital signature certificate. They looked at my driver's license and the way the L on my license falls back into the I like a hammock. They invoked words like hold and internal review and fraud unit. I sat there on a vinyl chair and felt a lifetime of work tense up inside me like a muscle preparing to lift something heavy. At last, Sonia folded her hands. "Miss Carter, we're placing a hold on the disbursement. Nothing will fund until this is resolved. You should file a police report with the county sheriff. We'll cooperate." "Thank you," I said, and meant it. Outside, the sky had turned that hard porcelain blue that shows up after a storm. Except the storm hadn't happened yet. I pulled my phone out and stared at Ben's name, my son. 34. He smelled like baby shampoo when he was born and charred oak and ambition now. He's always dreamed big. I have applauded from the stands, proud and a little exhausted. But what I have never done, was sign my name to his dreams. I didn't call him, not yet. I drove to the sheriff's office instead, where a tired ficus drooped in the corner and a woman at the window wore a sweater even though it was warm because the air conditioning was set to meat locker. I filed a report. A deputy named Lewis with crow feet and a scar across my knuckle took notes and said, "You did right coming in. We'll open a case number. With the loan on hold and a notary stamp likely fraudulent, we'll notify the fairgrounds to review permits. If anyone tries to serve food without the proper insurance or approvals, they can be shut down on the spot." "Do you arrest your own kids?" I asked him, my voice surprising me. He paused, like a man who knew about sons. He said, "I try not to let them cross a line so hard I have to make that call." And he pushed a small stack of cards across the counter. "Here's your case number. Here are the clerks you'll need at the courthouse if you decide to file a civil complaint, and here's the fairgrounds manager." I drove home and sat at my kitchen table with the stack of cards fanned like a bad hand in a game you don't want to play. My refrigerator hummed. Somewhere 2 streets over, somebody started a lawnmower. I thought of all the nights I'd stood at a hospital bed, charting medications while fluorescent lights buzzed overhead and the air smelled like antiseptic and microwaved soup. All those hours paid for my porch and the pecan tree and the peace I thought I'd earned. I called the fairgrounds and asked for Harold. Everybody knows Harold. He's 70 and wears a whistle on a lanyard, not because he needs it, but because it makes people behave. He picked up on the second ring. "Harold here." I said, "It's Leela Carter, friend of the fair." He said, "I know who you are, Leela. You always bring that peach cobbler to the pie contest and pretend you don't care if you win. Because Mrs. O'Malley brings a lattice crush you could hang in a museum." I said, "Harold, what would it take to reserve the corner hookups by the main stage for Saturday afternoon, 2 to 6? He made a little sound that meant he was looking at his clipboard with a pencil in his hand. He said, "That spot's booked by Smoke and Ember Barbecue." I said, "What if their permit was on hold?" Harold's deepened. He said, "Then it's first come, first paid." "Are you planning something?" I said, "I'd like to host a nurses and first responders appreciation cookout. My treat, no charge to our folks in scrubs or those who roll on sirens." "Now that's a thing worth making room for," I said. I could hear the smile in his voice. "If their permit gets flagged, I'll cone it off and hold it for you for 1 hour. After that, I'm a simple man with a busy festival." I said, "Understood." When I hung up, the house felt like a swimmer holding their breath. I walked to my bedroom and opened the closet where I keep a banker's box full of papers, not neatly labeled, but I know where everything lives. I took out the deed to my home and laid it on the bed like something to steady myself with.
My name printed there felt true and heavy. The box held photographs, too. Ben at 6 with a missing front tooth and a popsicle stain. Ben at 14 holding a fish he didn't want to touch. Ben at 20 in a community college graduation gown, his cap cocked at a rebellious angle. I sat down and held the picture of him at 8, red-eyed and furious because his Lego spaceship wouldn't click. I fixed it for him then. I always fix things. It's who I am. A nurse, a mother, a woman with a toolbox that includes Tylenol and casseroles and checkbooks. I cooked dinner out of muscle memory, chicken thighs and a cast-iron skillet, green beans with garlic, and I ate at the counter, fork clinking, the house too quiet in the way that rings. At 9, I went out on the porch. The neighborhood kids were chalking hearts on the sidewalk because a teacher told them kindness counts, and chalk is cheaper than therapy. The boy next door waved. I waved back, and the wave steadied me more than I expected. Wednesday morning arrived bright and peopled. Liz from across the street stopped by with donuts. "I heard an insurance lady called you," she said, "because secrets don't last in Maple Falls unless they're last names." I told her just enough. She listened with her eyebrows knitting up, then put both hands on my counter. "Do you want me to be mad with you, or do you want me to be calm?" I said, "Mad for 5 minutes, then calm after." We screamed quietly into dish towels for exactly 1 minute, like women who have lived long enough to know that yelling is useful, but not for very long. Then we sat with coffee and a legal pad. Liz was the school's secretary for years before she retired. She can turn chaos into a list, and a list into peace. "What do you want?" she asked me, pen poised. I hadn't thought about it like that. I'd been thinking about all the things I didn't want. I didn't want to feel tricked. I didn't want my name pasted onto something without my say. I didn't want to see my son in handcuffs on the front page of a paper with more ads than articles. "I want to feed my people on Saturday," I said slowly. "I want to stand on that patch of grass and say out loud that my name isn't a shortcut. I want Ben to own what he did without me having to break him to do it. I want rules, real ones, with signatures that aren't forged, and I want to sleep at night." "Okay," Liz said, writing these things down like a grocery list. "Then we work backwards. You've got the fairgrounds in motion, if the permit's on hold. You've got the credit union on your side. Tomorrow you talk to the hospital about head count and catering orders. You'll need tables, food warmers, and volunteers." "I'll call the women's club," I said. "Those ladies can run a kitchen with their eyes closed and a toddler on their hip." I called the Maple Falls Women's Club and left a rambling message that involved cornbread and gratitude. Within an hour, my phone lit up like a pinball machine. Everyone wanted to help. Everyone had a slow cooker and a heart. By noon, I had a spreadsheet Liz made with names and dishes and what time people would arrive on Saturday. It looked like hope in columns. I called St. Luke's and asked for Rita on the night shift. "How many nurses can we feed?" I asked. "How many want to come to the fair on Saturday and eat food they didn't microwave at 3 a.m.? "Are you kidding?" she said. "All of them." She sent me names because she knew that food tastes better when someone calls you by yours. In the afternoon, I drove to the sheriff's office to sign a statement. Deputy Lewis explained what could happen next. There were 2 lanes: criminal, where forgery is a word that weighs a lot and travels far, and civil, where adults sign their names to agreements that restrain them when emotions try to ruin good sense. I told him plainly, "I will do what keeps my son honest and my sleep deep."
"That's a good bar," he said, scratching the side of his nose. "We'll be there on Saturday, not to make trouble, just to make sure nobody else does." That night, I couldn't sleep. It wasn't anxiety, not exactly. It was the electric hum of a plan touching down in my body. I do best when I can count to 3 and know what happens on 4. Thursday morning, I went to the fairgrounds in a denim jacket because the breeze still bit around the edges. Harold showed me the electrical box by the main stage, the one with the prime outlets and the shade that would crawl across the lawn by early afternoon like a blessing. "If their permits held," he said, nodding toward his office, where a stack of clipboards leaned like lazy soldiers, "I'll cone this spot and put up your sign. The news is in town for Summerfest anyway. This'll be quiet and perfect, or a circus with popcorn. Either way, I'll be here with a whistle." "Thank you," I said. We'd gone to high school together in a year when hair was high and cars were long. He used to carry his trumpet case like something sacred. He still moves like a man who knows how to hold a note. By lunchtime, I had texts from Sonia and from Heartland Mutual. Compliance had flagged the notarization as invalid. The loan disbursement stayed frozen. The insurance endorsement sat in a digital drawer labeled, "Don't you dare." Heartland notified the fairgrounds permitting office, who notified Harold. Bureaucracy is slow until it isn't, and then it's a sled on ice. I made barbecue sauce that afternoon in a pot that belonged to my mother. Ketchup, apple cider vinegar, brown sugar, a splash of coffee because Mama swore it deepened the color like magic. The house filled with a smell that tugged old memories out of the corners. When the sauce cooled, I ladled it into mason jars and wrote little labels in my meat nurse handwriting. "Maple Falls tastes like this. Sweet and smoky and just sharp enough to remind you where you come from."
The phone rang at dinner. Ben's name filled the screen. I let it ring twice. On the third, I answered. "Mom," he said, breathless, as if he'd run. "We got a notice that our permit is on hold. There's some kind of mistake with the insurance. Can you call Heartland? They said your name is on it, and the mistake," I said, "is that my name is on anything." There was a beat of silence. "We were going to surprise you," he said finally, and he sounded like the boy with the Lego who believed that intentions matter more than broken pieces. "I surprise you," I said. "While we're trading truths, I froze the loan disbursement and I filed a police report." He inhaled, sharp. "Mom, why would you do that?" "Because my name is not your tool," I said. "You want to launch a barbecue truck? Ask me to show up with a folding table and a fan and a first aid kit. Ask me to slice onions and bring a cooler of ice. Ask me to pray. But do not borrow my signature because you worry I'll say no. That's not respect. That's control." He started talking fast, the way he does when he thinks speed can outrun consequence. "We had to reserve the prime spot by the stage. Tara says if you don't seize the optics, you'll lose momentum. We needed the endorsement and the cosign, and we intend to pay everything, and it's not like we—" "Then," I said quietly, and the quiet worked better than any lecture, "you forged my name." "He didn't," he said too quickly. "Tara—" He stopped. "We used a signature tool online. It was just easier." "Easier than driving to my house and asking me to sign a paper?" I asked. "Easier than looking me in the eye and letting me say yes or no?" He swallowed. I could hear it. "We knew you'd say no," he said. A small voice now, a voice like the underside of truth. "Then that's when you ask," I said, and my voice was old and new at the same time. "When you know someone might say no, that's exactly when you ask." He let out a sound halfway between a sigh and something breaking. "So what now?" "Saturday, you're going to work under my rules. You'll serve free plates to every nurse and firefighter who shows up between 2 and 6. You'll apologize publicly. And Monday morning, you'll meet me at the county courthouse. We'll talk about what the next year looks like with contracts and signatures that count."
He didn't argue. Maybe he had no breath left for it. "Okay," he said finally. "Okay." I hung up and stood at the sink with my hands braced on the edge. The window above the sink looks into the backyard. The pecan tree leaned into the top of the frame, a green dark arch. I rested my head against the glass until my skin cooled. Then I set to work because work is what saves me. Roasting pans, lists, phone calls, a paper taped to the fridge that said Saturday in block letters. Friday morning, I drove to the diner on Main, where the coffee tastes like hope and the eggs come with toast even if you don't ask. Old men gathered at the counter to discuss weather and baseball. Teenagers trying to look indifferent practice being alive. I told Linda behind the counter about the cookout. She hollered to the kitchen, "Put me down for a vat of coleslaw and a tray of brownies." And the cook lifted a ladle in salute. This is how small towns are dangerous and safe at the same time. Everyone knows everything, and sometimes that's the only net that catches you when you fall. At noon, I met with Harold and a man from the county permits office named Roger, whose mustache deserved its own mailing address. They showed me a sign Harold laminated on the office printer. Reserved, Nurses and First Responders Appreciation Cookout, host Leela Carter. It was just plastic and words, but it felt like a fence. Roger reviewed with me slowly and kindly the rules about serving food at what is technically a public event. He said, "You're operating under the fairgrounds umbrella if you're not selling. Harold will keep eyes on traffic. If anyone gives you grief, point to me. I'll likely be 6 feet away with a lemonade." I went home and napkin counted. I set up a staging area in my garage with folding tables and those aluminum trays that look like they could be flimsy, but aren't. The women's club texted pictures of their crock pots lined up like a battalion. Church ladies know logistics. We were going to be fine. Saturday dawned bright and noisy. Summerfest woke up long before the official start. Vendors rolled in with jars of jam and spools of hand-dyed yarn. Kids in matching t-shirts practiced a dance routine in the parking lot while their mother tried to pin a hair bow on a moving target. The air smelled like kettle corn and new sunscreen. At 11, a shiny red food truck turned onto the gravel road, new enough to blind. Smoke and Ember Barbecue, scripted across the side and a font somebody paid money for. Ben drove. Tara rode shotgun with a clipboard and a headset like she was guiding planes to land. They pulled up to the main stage and stopped short at the orange cones, the laminated sign, and Harold in his polo with a whistle.
Ben jumped down. We stared at each other across the cones. He was a big kid. He's a big man. He still has the same scar on his chin from when he tripped over a sprinkler in 3rd grade. He still pushes his cap back when he's nervous. "Mom," he said, and then he looked at Harold. "We have the spot reserved." Harold shook his head. "Permits on administrative hold," he said. "All business. You can't plug in, can't serve." Tara started toward Harold, clipboard clutched like a shield. "We have a contract," she said, her voice right on the edge. "We have 50 pounds of brisket and 40 of pork and people coming for our soft launch and a local news spot at 4. "You have a hold," Harold repeated, "and you have Miss Carter." Ben looked at me. "Please," he said, and the words scraped. "We're sunk if we miss this. The meat's paid for, the truck's financed." We thought he stopped himself. Good. Maybe he finally understood that thinking and doing are cousins, not twins. "I thought you could borrow my name and deal with it later." Tara's chin jerked up. "We were going to put you on the articles anyway," she said. "You'd be part of it, family." Family is where you ask, not where you assume. A woman in a sundress paused, watching us with the hyper-interest people reserve for train wrecks and yard sales. The band on the main stage tuned a guitar. A boy with the balloon dog walked by at exactly the speed of childhood. The world didn't stop because mine was shifting, and that grounded me more than any deep breath. I told Ben, "You can launch, just not the way you planned. Today you work with me. We feed nurses and firefighters for free. After that, if there's food left and we follow every rule the fairgrounds breeds at us, we'll sell plates by donation and hand the money to St. Luke's Foundation for the overnight lounge. Monday, courthouse at 9 with my lawyer and your best pen. You'll speak into a microphone and say you used my name without permission. You'll apologize. If you walk away now, I'll keep walking too, right down the center of that courthouse hall into a complaint I do not want to file." He nodded too quickly, relief and panic fighting in his face. "Okay. "We can't give everything away," Tara whispered to him, but she was looking at me and knew better than to say it loud. "You'll be fine," I said to Ben. "If this is the work you're meant to do, it will survive a day of humility." We moved. Harold directed the truck to the side to park near a lesser outlet for the lights inside. The women's club arrived like a wave. Blue aprons, hair sprayed into place, aluminum pans, casseroles covered with foil. Rita came with a crew of nurses still in scrubs, their name badges clipped to necklines like talismans. The firefighters rolled in with a folding table and a griddle. Roger stood within 6 feet at all times, sipping lemonade and watching the flow like a lifeguard. Harold pressed a cordless mic into my hand. He didn't ask. He just put it there. "Maple Falls likes to be told what it's watching," he murmured. I climbed 2 steps onto the little stage and waited for the band to finish a chord. The mic hummed. I felt every pair of eyes pivot to me. I felt the shade creep toward us like it had been promised. "Good afternoon, Maple Falls," I said, and I surprised myself by not shaking. "I'm Leela Carter. Some of you know me because I came to your rooms at 2 a.m. with a blood pressure cuff and a soft voice. Some of you know me because I bring too much cobbler to potlucks. Today you were supposed to meet Smoke and Ember Barbecue in this spot. You still will, but not the way you saw on the flyer." I saw Ben over by the service window, head tilted, listening like the words might tell him what the next hour would feel like. "This week," I said, "my name was added to insurance and loan documents for a business I did not sign on to. My name was used because somebody figured I'd say yes if I never had a chance to say no. That's not how we do it here. So we're doing something else. We're feeding every nurse and firefighter who shows their badge free of charge for the next 4 hours. After that, if there's food left and we follow every rule the fairgrounds breathes at us, we'll sell plates by donation and hand every dollar to St. Luke's Foundation to buy the things that make night shifts survivable." The crowd made that happy murmur sound crowds make when a story trips toward redemption. I looked straight at the local news camera because of course it had found us. "And then on Monday," I said, "we'll go to the courthouse and write down some rules about names and consent and respect. I didn't raise a son who takes a shortcut with someone else's work. We're going to show him what work looks like, right here." People clapped. It started at the sides like popcorn and bloomed to the center. A teenage boy in a Maple Falls Tigers hoodie pumped his fist for some reason that might have been the music or the fact that he's alive and surrounded by food. I handed the mic back to Harold and walked to the service table. "Gloves? Apron." He nodded and did exactly as he was told. And if you've never seen a man learn something in real time, let me tell you, it's holy. Tara took a breath like she was about to spin some argument. Then she angled her headset and started organizing the line. "Let me see badges. Nurses first, firefighters next, then EMTs. Thank you for being here." And we served. We ladled beans and scooped slaw and made plates heavy enough to require 2 hands. I looked every nurse in the eye and said, "Thank you for last night." And I meant the text at 3:12 a.m. about a patient who wouldn't stop bleeding. And I meant the way Rita always refilled the warmers. And I meant the nights I cried in the supply closet during year 21 because the world felt too sharp. We fed firefighters who smelled like clean smoke and sunshine. We fed 2 paramedics who once held my elbow in an icy parking lot when I slipped 3 winters ago. We fed a nurse's husband who handed me a daisy over the counter and said, "You folks kept her alive for a decade." And I tucked that flower into the napkin holder and wanted to cry.
2 hours in, the news anchor, perfect hair, perfect smile, asked if she could get a comment. I pointed her to Ben. He stood there, apron smudged, hat turned forward like he'd remembered where respect begins. The anchor asked him what this was. He swallowed and spoke into the lens like it might remember who he is. "I used my mom's name without asking," he said. "Today she's letting me earn back a little of what that name means. Thank you, Maple Falls, for showing up. For her and for our nurses." The anchor nodded in that newsy way that means good TV. And people in line cheered like they understood that truth is the only confession worth making. By 4, the jar on the end of the table, the one with a handwritten sign that said St. Luke's Overnight Lounge, bulged with bills and envelopes. People folded $20 bills and 5s and 1s and slid in checks with their neat Sunday school handwriting. I watched teenagers shove their allowance past the rim like generosity might multiply if it fell just right. I thought of the first night I'd worked at St. Luke's, 22 years old and scared, and how a nurse named Val had pressed a granola bar into my palm and said, "Eat. We are here a long time, honey." The jar looked like that granola bar felt. At 5:45, we served the last plate to a retired EMT who came through the line in his old jacket that smelled like winter and diesel. He took his plate and saluted, a little embarrassed. We saluted back with barbecue tongs. When it was over, the square of grass by the stage looked like a battlefield after a victory. We scrubbed pans with hose water while dusk slid down the sky. The women's club packed up with the efficient kindness of women who have held other women's tears. Tara stacked trays and looked at me, eyes wet and hair escaping the elastic. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, the head set crooked on her neck like a surrendered crown. I pushed him. I told him you'd be proud once we were successful. "I would have been," I said, "if you'd knocked first." Ben stood beside the truck with his hands on his hips, looking more tired than I'd seen him since the week he worked double shifts at the hardware store to save for a chair that leans back into a nap. He thanked me for not calling the sheriff on me. "I did call them," I said, "because truth is a muscle that grows when you use it. They came to protect us all. It's my job to keep you out of handcuffs. It's their job to keep the peace. Both can be true." We counted the jar on my dining room table that night. Liz sat with us like an accountant without a briefcase. The money spread across the wood like paper leaves. It totaled more than I expected and less than the world deserves, which is how money always feels. We wrote a check to St. Luke's Foundation and sealed it in an envelope that smelled like barbecue and hand sanitizer. When Ben left, he hugged me. He hasn't hugged me like that since his first Little League hit that wasn't an accident. Sunday dripped slow. I went to church in the morning and hugged every neck that stepped into reach. Father Jim preached about names and the way they build or bend, and I don't know if he wrote that sermon at 6 a.m. after a text from someone who saw the news, or if the Holy Spirit just knows the local channel schedule. Either way, people cried and then ate donuts in the fellowship hall with sticky fingers, and I added my napkin to the trash and went home to rest. Ben stopped by at dusk. He stood on the porch like boys in old movies, hat in hand, shoulders slumped in humility he hadn't worn in years. He said I was wrong. I said yes. The word didn't sting. It landed and sat still. He said we needed your name to be taken seriously. He thought if I asked, you'd say no because you're careful, and careful feels like a break. I said careful is a seatbelt. It doesn't stop you from moving. It stops your head from going through the windshield. He laughed once helpless and then sighed. "See you at the courthouse." "On time." "On time," he echoed. Monday morning, we drove separately to the county courthouse. The building is square and tired, with paint that flakes at the edges and a metal detector that chirps at belt buckles. The clerk's office smells like paper and old coffee. Sonia from the credit union met us there. Her bun meat, the ceramic frog on her desk, I am convinced, feeling this in its tiny ceramic heart. She had already done the work on her end. The fraudulent notary stamp would be investigated. The loan would not disburse under those documents. The insurance endorsement had been withdrawn. Heartland's representative appeared by phone, and I listened to a disembodied voice say, "We apologize for any distress this caused, Miss Carter," and knew we were okay for now. Then the part that mattered most and least, because money is only the surface. We met with a legal aid attorney from my church, a woman named Daphne, who could file a motion and bake a pie at the same time. She drafted an operating agreement on her laptop while we sat, heads bowed like kids at the principal's office. She read the terms aloud, and we repeated them like Sunday school verses. For 12 months, I would hold 51% ownership of Smoke and Ember, not to control the business like a puppeteer, but to ensure no one could borrow my name without my notice. Then would hold 49% with a buyback schedule. The company would pay me $1 in consideration and a promise in practice. No use of my identity, signature, name, or likeness on any financial instrument, insurance, permit, or public document without my written consent. 10% of the first year's net would go to St. Luke's Foundation, because a town is a table that feeds you back if you feed it. We initialed each page. I dotted my I without a heart. I signed my name the way I learned in 10th grade on a form that let me work in the school library during study hall. My hand didn't shake. When the clerk stamped the final page, the thunk of the seal sounded like something settling into place, then exhaled in a rush. "Thank you," he said, to me, to Daphne, to Sonia, maybe to the ceramic frog by extension. "Don't thank me for insisting on a standard. Thank me in a year when you've met it." We walked out into sunlight that made the courthouse look kinder. The steps were high. Ben offered me his arm. I took it because I carry my pride in a sensible pocket. We learned how to work together after that, slowly, because slow is the only speed that sticks. Smoke and Ember parked outside St. Luke's every Thursday from 11 to 2. Nurses in scrubs wore their badges and a smile that said 2 meals because night shift deserves leftovers. Then found his rhythm with the smoker. Tara gave up the headset for a clipboard and learned that clipboards don't yell back. She apologized again, properly, in private, in words that owned what she'd done instead of the consequences she'd faced. And I believed her because she started showing me with actions, knocking, asking, pausing. They came to my house for dinner on Sundays once a month with fresh flowers that smelled like little apologies, and Tara insisted on doing the dishes while Ben wiped the counters. We wrote down rules for holidays and who brings what and when to stop talking about work at the table. We filed our papers at the end of the year with every signature neat and none of them borrowed. People recognized me in the grocery store, and in the aisle with the canned tomatoes were maple syrup hides because the stock boy never puts things back in the same place. Strangers stopped me to say, "I saw you on the news," and "My sister is a nurse and cried watching your speech," and "My cousin's son forged a signature once. We didn't handle it well. I wish we had." I nodded and said thank you, and went home and sat on my porch with iced tea and a quiet that felt earned. On a Tuesday evening in October, I watched a storm roll in from the west, low and dark. The pecan tree knocked the roof like it always does. Then called from the truck and said, "We sold out by noon," and there was pride and exhaustion in equal measure. "Terrace is high. She's filling out the permit renewal now. Do you want to review it before we submit it?" "Yes," I said, and he did not bristle. When we hung up, I thought about names, how long they take to build, how they can be borrowed in an afternoon with a PDF and an internet connection and a person who wants yes without the risk of hearing no. I thought about the tape on the floor in my old hospital's med room that told you where to stand when someone opened the fridge so nobody knocked into anybody else. Boundaries aren't walls, they're hallways. A week later, a young woman I didn't know stopped by my house with a pie and a baby on her hip. She said, "I'm new to town. I watched your video and cried on my couch. My mother lives in Florida. She still says yes when she wants to say no. I don't want to be like that. How did you get brave?" "I didn't," I said honestly. "I got tired of being careful in the wrong direction." She laughed, and the baby slapped the pie with a fat, happy hand that left a dent and made it better.
In December, the fairgrounds put up a banner that read, "Maple Falls loves its nurses," and the mayor stood under it like a man who knows a good optic when he sees one. The town council asked me to speak at the Christmas tree lighting, and I talked about gratitude and about how the nativity starts with a woman saying yes to something that took her whole life to carry. People wiped their eyes and sang Silent Night and then ate cookies because that's what you do to survive December. By the next Summerfest, Smoke and Ember had a paid proper spot under the big shade tree by the music tent. I walked past the line at 2 in the afternoon and then yelled, "Mom, get in here before Tara sells your portion." And the kids in line laughed. I took a plate and sat on the grass and watched the town move around me, tidy and messy and honest, like all the towns in America where people still put their names on things that matter. Not every day was easy. There were arguments about sauce and hours and whether to add a chicken dish for the folks who find pork too heavy. There was a day when the truck's engine coughed and died 50 feet from a church picnic, and 3 deacons pushed it the rest of the way with jokes and good shoes. There was a month when Tara's mother got sick, and she flew to Tucson twice and came home thin around the edges. And we didn't talk about signatures then. We talked about soup.
Once, a man cornered me by the produce at the grocery store and said, "You humiliated your son on TV." And I looked at the avocados and back at him and said, "I humiliated a bad decision. There's a difference." He huffed away. The avocados were hard. I bought bananas instead. One afternoon in late spring, I sat at the hospital's overnight lounge, a room that used to have 2 broken chairs and a table with a puzzle missing 7 pieces, and now had recliners and a microwave that doesn't arc and a little refrigerator with string cheese, and watched a nurse fall asleep sitting up with a half-open granola bar in her hand. Someone had grabbed a Sharpie and written on the fridge door, "Be kind to night shift. Your daylight depends on them." I took a picture of that door and sent it to Ben, and he texted back a heart. Not because he thinks he owns the symbol, but because he has learned how to use it properly. I tell people now, when they ask for advice, to write down the thing they will not lend without asking. It's different for everyone. Some people won't lend money, some won't lend time, some won't lend their tools. I won't lend my name. That's not stingy. That's accurate. Names are like roofs. They don't matter until it rains, and then they matter more than anything. On a Sunday in June, Tara and I sat on my porch while Ben mowed my small patch of grass because he's discovered that service feels like love in motion. A blue jay landed on the pecan tree and shouted about whatever blue jays shout about. Tara took a breath. I haven't told you this, but I was embarrassed that day at Summerfest. Not just because of the microphone, because my mother never says no, and I was reckless with that fact. I thought women's names were elastic. Yours wasn't. I'm grateful. Elastic names snap. They leave marks when they do. She nodded, and we sat with it. And the yard smelled like cut grass and the kind of quiet that comes after a long song. Sometimes in the evenings, I walk to the fairgrounds when they're empty, just to see the square of grass where the cones used to be. The wind lifts the corners of the laminated signs stapled to poles. The world is ordinary there. Ordinary in the best way. School kids jog around the track. A man teaches his daughter to ride a bike without training wheels. The quarter horses in the arena snort and toss their heads, bored and beautiful. I stand for a minute and remember the weight of a microphone in my hand and the way sound carried and came back true. I go home to my blue bungalow and sit on the porch with tea that sweats down the sides of the glass.
The sun lowers itself behind the town like it knows how many lights will flick on in windows and wants to count. I think about a line I said into a microphone I didn't ask for. Love without consent is control. Love with consent is partnership. A mother's name isn't a shortcut. It's a standard. People have started quoting that in the comments on the video that refuses to stop circling the internet. Someone printed it on a t-shirt and brought me one, and I wear it to water the tomatoes. The seedlings have taken hold again this year. I pinch off the suckers. I tie the stems with strips of an old pillowcase so they don't break in the wind. I learned that from my mother, who never wrote alone, never forged a signature, never once told me to be bigger than my name. She told me to grow into it. I'm doing that still. I might be 62, but there is new work in front of me. Work that looks like telling the truth and making sandwiches. Work that looks like clapping when your son parks a truck correctly and frowning when he doesn't check the air in the tires. And watching him apologize to a stranger because he didn't cut the brisket against the grain. Work that looks like an operating agreement in a file folder and a jar on a table that fills up with bills and hope. On a quiet Thursday night, Ben sent me a photo of a receipt roll, endless orders, scribbled in backups when the printer jammed because paper jams don't stop hungry people. Under it, he wrote, "We're good." Under that, he wrote, "Thank you for making me better." I put my phone down and cried. The kind of tears that don't land in grief or relief, but somewhere in the middle where pride makes a new shape. If you drive through Maple Falls in late summer, you might see the red truck by the hospital. The line of scrubs, the women with clipboards who move like ballet, not because they are graceful, but because everyone knows exactly when to lead. You might smell smoke and sugar and vinegar in the air. You might hear a woman laugh behind a window where a man with a hat turned forward is slicing meat with the patience of a person who has learned that rush doesn't equal success. If you lean close enough to the service window, you'll see a photo taped to the metal. Me, in a blue apron, holding a ladle like a scepter. Under it, in black Sharpie, a line that isn't a slogan so much as a promise. Ask first.